Yes, Professor Rose. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Can we start?
Yes, we can start. Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to welcome our Pro Vice Chancellor, Ma'am, Professor Uma Kanchilal, our eminent speakers for the day, and faculty from various schools, research scholars, our learners are joining from different parts of India for this webinar. And the webinar it is going to be live in YouTube as well as in Facebook. So participants can join any of these platforms. First of all, I would like to place my gratitude to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Nageshwar Rao, and our Pro Vice Chancellor, Ma'am, Professor Uma Kanchilal, for their kind approval and support to organize this webinar on the topic Social Policy at Crossroad, a Constitutional Perspective. So now I would like to invite Professor Rose Nembiakim, Director, School of Social Work, to address the participants.
Good afternoon, one and all. I'd like to give a brief introduction about the School of Social Work, IGNOU. So the School of Social Work in Indira Gandhi National Open University was established in 2007. It aims at providing quality education in the areas of social work, HIV/AIDS, counseling, and family studies by offering programs leading to the award of certificate, diploma, degree, and now the doctoral degree. So here in front of you, I'd like to welcome the eminent speakers, as mentioned by Dr. Ramya, who are attending this webinar series, Social Policy at Crossroad, a Constitutional Perspective. Now, this is an aspect which is very important, and I would also like to inform the audience here that the School of Social Work at IGNOU is the first school of social work to be offering social work programs in the open and distance learning mode, and also now very currently and recently online mode as well. And it has taken social work education to all parts of India as well as in some international borders. I'm also glad to mention here that our ever-present Professor Vice Chancellor, Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Uma Kanchilal, is present among us and whose guidance means a lot to the school and will always be. Having to say this again, in today's webinar, we are privileged to be listening to Dr. Nivedita P. Heron, former Additional Chief Secretary, Kerala, and Professor Madhushi Sekhar, Dean International Relations Office, as well as the Dean School of Vocational Education, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Now, this is the school initiative towards celebrating the Constitution Day on the 26th of November, 2022. And we would also like to celebrate this in order to commemorate the adoption of the Constitution of India in the year 1949. As mentioned by Dr. Ramya, once again, I would like to thank Vice Chancellor, Professor Nageshwar Rao ji, and also Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Uma Kanchilal, for their continuous guidance and support and always having our back whenever we need it. And welcome to the speakers, and we look forward to hear from you. And to the audience who are plugged in from different corners of India, welcome once again to the School of Social Work webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rose Nembiakim. Now, I'm happy to invite Dr. Binod Kumar, the program coordinator for this webinar, who took the initiative to organize an online Constitution Day lecture, so which is very relevant topic as of now. So, Dr. Binod, kindly say a few words introducing the topic.
Respected Vice Chancellor, respected PVC ma'am, Director, faculty, today's expert, and my dear students. Today's deliberation, the idea of today's deliberation is that to see how Constitution is very important in terms of providing the social policy framework in this country. Because when we talk about various rights as well as various entitlements which are there in Part 3 and Part 4 of our Constitution, first, there is a thrust on individual rights, and second, when we talk about directive principle of a state policy, which is bedrock of the social policy framing and social policy making in this country. So the idea is that social work has a huge literature developed over the time on social policy, and these social policy get crystallized only when it comes through the constitutional framework, because many what we see today as rights, earlier they were part of the directive principle of a state policy. Like if you see right to work, which was converted into the Manrex Act, all these are part of all these have been part of the directive principle of a state policy. Like just another example is right to education. Earlier, still it is part of directive principle of a state policy. So there is a huge thrust on that particular part. So I thought that these two disciplines, the law as well as social work, how it interplays, and what are the importance of uh, having these two things together, so that we can learn from both the expert. One is completely coming from the academic perspective, and one will be giving the policy making as well as insights from the government. So with this, I would like to stop here. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Binod, for such a nice brief introduction. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Uma Kanchilal ma'am from Indira Gandhi National Open University. She has more than 31 years of experience in open and distance learning system. Professor Uma Kanchilal is one of the national coordinators of SWAYAM and SWAYAM Prabha of the Ministry of Human Resource Development. She was also a principal investigator of IGNO for the National Virtual Library of India. That is a project of Ministry of Culture. And her specialization includes e-learning, multimedia courseware development, ICT applications in libraries and digital libraries. She also served as director of Center for Online Education, university librarian, director, School of Social Sciences, Director, Advanced Center for Informatics and Innovative Learning in our university, and Director, Inter-University Consortium of Technology-Enabled Flexible Education at IGNO. She was also a Fulbright Scholar in University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign in the year 1999 to 2000. Now, I would like to invite ma'am to deliver her special address. Ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ramya. Respected invited speakers, Dr. Nivedita P. Haran and Professor Madhushri Sekar, Professor Nambikam, Director, School of Social Work, and her team, my colleagues from the university, and all the participants who have joined in different platforms for this event today, the webinar that is happening. I would like to congratulate the school for organizing this event for the Constitution Day celebration, in which we have two really eminent speakers, and I'm eager to listen to them, in fact. The topic is aptly chosen, that is social policy at crossroads, constitution perspective. And I think from the school's perspective, this is a very important topic, and it could actually lead to some, we can think in terms of perhaps in future to have some courses also developed on that. We need to work on that. I think I'll work with the faculty and see the possibilities that are there. So as we know that this Constitution Day is celebrated on 26th of November every year to pay respect to the framers of the Constitution, which was adopted on this day in 1949. Actually, if you look into the Indian Constitution, lays out the framework for achieving the larger goals envisioned by the Constitution framers and freedom fighters. And more from the point of view, it's important when we talk about social justice, social work context, in fact. It clearly lays out how ideals have to be achieved and the interest of poor and marginalized people are to be protected. If you look into the preamble of the Constitution, it uses terms like socialist, social economic justice, equality, etc., which actually indicate concerns about the robust social policy that needs to be put in place, and it's a part and parcel of the constitutional framework. In fact, the same concern has been highlighted in the form of fundamental rights, which give a solid foundation for the protection of individual rights. If we look into the directive principles of state policy, again, it has been, it devotes towards the welfare responsibilities of the government, laying down the norms of ideal governance for the people's welfare, which is the main source of Indian social policy. And these directive principles actually anticipate a lot of provisions for the welfare of the people at large, relating to education, environment, promotion of justice, free legal aid, living wages, protection of marginalized groups, forest and wildlife, so and so forth. The government both, I mean, when we talk about the government, both at the center as well as the state, are making efforts for fulfillment of directive principles in its economic capacity. And the real challenge still remains with us as how to transform these principles into an action-oriented policy. So that's a concern that needs to be addressed. And I think from the, sorry, I have a very bad throat. So the discipline of social work has an importance in this context, and it goes hand in hand with effective social policy planning. And in fact, therefore, it is a huge responsibility for the discipline to revamp and the existing programs that are there, so that it meets the requirement of constitutional imperatives and social welfare. In fact, the school is doing a very good job. In fact, they have updated their courses and programs. They are coming up with new ideas, and a lot of events and workshops they have been conducting. And I mean, we have a very young faculty also working, and we look forward to a lot of initiatives coming from their side. And in fact, not only ODL program, they are also into the online education arena, where they are in fact not only reaching out students across the country, but to a great extent to international students also. So, I mean, I would like to congratulate the school, and they are coming up with new ideas how to go forward, innovative ways to reach out to the learners. So I think keeping in view this requirement, and in fact, since you are celebrating, please think in terms of perhaps if this can be made into, though this lecture will be recorded and made available, but can we take this further forward, create awareness among people, have some short-term courses developed? That's where I would look forward to the initiative taken from the school side. So with this, I would end my speech here. Thank you very much, and really eager to listen to the expert speakers today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Definitely we'll think about it and come out with an action plan. And thank you so much. You are always inspiring and motivating our school for organizing such webinars and other academic activities. Now, not taking much time, I'm happy to introduce our speakers for today. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Professor Madhushri Shekhar, who's from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. And she is currently the Dean of International Relations Office, Dean, School of Vocational Education, TIS. Her core area of interest are on political economy, institutions, political economy of representation, governance, inclusive development, and policy implementation. Her current research is on institutions for food security, inequalities and social welfare systems, and democratic representation in India. She has been a recipient of the Australian Research Council grant, and also she has received grants from International Food Policy Research Institute and Indian Council of Social Science Research, which was a major project grant. And she has also got a grant from Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute and from Ratan Tata Trust. She is also currently associated with an international research consortium to study ethnic power relations funded by Swiss Development Council and Swiss National Science Foundation. She was a visiting faculty at IFPRI Washington, the University of Hohenheim, Stuttgart, Germany, the University of Sydney, and also a visiting professor at the Tata Cornell Institute, Cornell University, New York. And she is also author of many research articles, books like Feeding India, Livelihoods, Entitlement and Capabilities, Governance and Governed, and also Including and Excluded in South Asia, which was published by Springer in the year 2019. And she's also received one of the prestigious fellowship from World Bank Robert S. McNamara Fellowship for her postdoctoral research. Now I request ma'am to deliver her talk. Please, ma'am.
You are mute, ma'am. Please unmute.
Thank you so much for the
Yes.
most generous introduction, Professor there. My gratefulness and my warm gratitude to the Vice Chancellor, Professor Nagesh Rao, and Ma'am, Professor Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Uma Kanjilal, to you, Dr. Ramya, and to Dr. Vinod for inviting me to give this very important talk. And I'm very honored to be sharing this platform with Madam Nivedita Haran, so that she's been a teacher and one of the persons we follow when we talk about policy and policy implementation and how we work around that. So I'm very honored to be sharing this platform with her. Do I have the sharing rights to share my screen?
Yes, ma'am, you can share.
Okay, thank you. Can you see this? Can you see my screen?
Yes,
we
yes.
can.
Come in.
Okay, thank you. So as I've been asked, without spending much time, I just go straight to the topic, which is policy, social policy for me at Crossroads, a constitutional perspective. And that's what I've been asked, and I will try and do my best to present some of my thoughts and ideas around this point of this topic for all the listeners. And what I'm going to talk around is around the whole idea of the structure, is around the social question in India, the constitutional underpinnings of social policy in India, evolution of social policy in India, and how we have moved ahead with these aspects, particularly with reference to 2 points of interaction that I'm talking, 3 points. One is social protection and climate change, and the second is skill development and training within the large framework of social policy structure that we are looking at today when you're looking at constitutionalism and how social policy is at crossroads when we look within the constitution and what the constitution tells. Now, coming to what we say, what is social policy? When we say social policy, particularly in India, it automatically refers to certain social questions that are underpinning or relevant to India and what we see in India. The multiple diversities, the plurality, the context, the huge population, the political processes that we see, all of this comes within that. And it covers issues of political, that is center, our relationships, center, state, local, community, because today we are also talking about one more aspect of the governance structure, that is the community and the individuals. This is the fourth tab, which we always don't, and when we have the political parties. We also talk about socio-cultural factors. The socio-cultural factors are multiple diversities around religion, caste issues, class issues, and language concerns. Dynamics around population and the population that we see, an ever-growing population today. We have the distinction of becoming the most populous country in the world, which is our strength, but also creates much of the challenges in reaching social welfare policies and people to the people. So this involves questions around the whole questions around gender, geographies, education, and income factors. Then the one more fourth item, which is very important, which we talk about is in the question of social, is resources. Now, these resources are the resources that we see around us, the common property resources that we use, water, land, forest, etc., the private ownership resources, and the whole question of budgeting and planning and provisioning that we talk about when we talk. And then another aspect is looking at the capital. Now, capital is the capital we talk about, the local capital, the global capital, and the formal capital. These are capitals around the networks, the capital, which is social, economic, and political, which are our capital when we're talking about this. So these become the factors, these become the determinants in degrees based around which in the context we are discussing and observing how we have moved ahead with social policies and how we are moving ahead over time from what has been given to us in the Constitution and what we are talking as part of the Constitution, because Constitution becomes a fundamental law of the land around which all the social policies we're talking about. So these aspects involve aspects like overlap, contestations, negotiations with each other across these multiple dynamics that we're looking at: political stores, center, local, community demand, the socio-cultural religion factors, the demographic demands, and the resource use and resource conditions. So these contestations between different forms of development paradigms which we see, which involve both positive externalities and negative externalities, that is, which are positive in terms of creating conditions for negotiation, positive, as well as negative external, which create confirmations around participation. These are important because these are based on different levels of organizations and groups that we're talking about when we talk about processes to which the policies get shaped. And excuse me, somebody said something. Okay, so these are all of this, the social question around social policies in the Indian constitutional context, therefore involves all of these dimensions which I said: political, socio-cultural, demographic, resources. And these create, because of the interactions and negotiations which are formal and informal, structured and unstructured, which are public goods related, these are all connected with conditions of experiences, perceptions, and time are other factors which create the conditions around which social changes are seen and located within the question of the Constitution in our planning, participation, and policy processes. This is the context I wanted to lay when talking about social policies. Therefore, social policies are linked very closely to issues of social security. And today in our work, when we talk about social policies, we are talking about non-conventional securities. Non-conventional securities are not linked to conditions of violence and conflict, but social securities around social concerns, social policies. So these come around issues of gender, socioeconomic conditions of exclusion, employability, institutional capacities, the whole question of education, awareness, access, the whole issues of participation of communities, and lack of devolution. We look at decentralization and structures around decentralization, which are reaching power to the people or not reaching power. There are conditions around the 3 Fs, we say: functions, finances, and functionalities. So this all comes up to conditions which we say are the administrative costs, the bottlenecks, the structures around which the whole social policies today, which we see around the Constitution, becomes feasible. So this is a very complex landscape. The whole complex, it's a very complex landscape that to understand it, we need to understand these processes and systems. Therefore, when we say the social policies, the constitutional underpinnings around this, yes, we all know it relates to the directive principles of state policies, which are part of our Constitution and listed in Part 4 of the Constitution. We all know that. The social policies have been given to us with the idea of reaching welfare. The basic principle is around this idea of principles of reaching welfare to people. Now, these principles are therefore constructed around by recognizing the community and individual capacities that are critical in our system, and that are critical also when we talk about social policies is in reaching governance and institutional linkages to reaching the social policies and intervention to the last mile. So this comes in this. So in doing so, what are we talking about? We are talking about multi-stakeholders, various stakeholders. Most important in this is the government. And this links, and this government role is how critically we are linking these principles and practices between, because we are a democracy, we are a democratic system, we work around politics and negotiation. So linking principles around and practices around the policies and subsequently to programs around the larger spaces of community and of people who are representing us. So social policy, therefore, in India derives this constitution based from its directive principles, but it works around, the approach is is in the form of practices and capacities of individuals and communities, which is critical to India's priority in reaching development and attaining the sustainable development goals, which is today also we're talking about climate and climate changes. You've got the 17th September Sustainable Development Goals. And if you look at all the September, all of them are linked to almost invariably in different ways to how we are reaching our social policies, attaining. So as I said, it is very important that we look at social security, which is an essential part of the Constitution, part 4 of the Constitution. And in this regard, the role of the executive and legislative arm of the government becomes most important in understanding this. And today we are also we are very proud to say we have got a very strong decentralized government. We have the local bodies which have the relevant authority given to them, because these were the idea of local governance, which was all embedded in part 4 as part of these executive principles, where we talked about reaching government to the people. And the measures, therefore, are this directive, the emphasis has been to address these concerns related to social security towards India's population and giving a positive direction towards addressing these needs through regular and adequate and what structures that we talk about in our administrative structures and dealing with our governance mechanisms, so that we can make it more responsive and able to reach this. And it is here that we say that we are looked at, for example, the whole social policy structure today we're looking at the whole, so it covers issues around disaster trends, costs, whatever disaster we had, the shocks, the food chains crisis, the whole issue around gender domains within the social policy space, whether we are talking about gender empowerment, whether we are talking about agriculture, whether we are talking anything, and looking at gender concerns. We are even today talking about engendering institutions. That means the whole gender dimension has become part of the larger discussion about social policies and within the Constitution. As part of this, we also talk about broadening information. And that's where we have seen how information has become one of the rights, right to information, because asymmetrical, we always say, if information is not reached equally to everybody, it's not available, it doesn't make proper decision making. So asymmetrical information can lead to asymmetrical interventions. Access to welfare, everything becomes. So we are talking about all of this around actions around certain points of action, whether it is disaster, food, gender, concerns around gender, concerns around institutions, making it itself, and talking about women's leadership as part of this whole structure. Over a period of time, if you see our 5-year plans and post-2000, all of them have at different points of time prioritized different aspects of the social policies that we're talking about. Whether it was capital intensive development policies in the policies we saw between 50s and 60s, to the focus on green revolution that we saw around green revolution, and we saw small scale industries around here. Then we saw the focus in 80s and 90s around modernization and diversification of agriculture structure. And then we saw questions around partial deregulation around the economy. Then in 90s and 2000, we start seeing the structural adjustment programs, and we started a role of market coming up, deregulation happening. And that's where post-2000, we are now talking about social policies which are not just aimed at creating capabilities for people to access welfare, but also creating capacities in people to deal and to avail the welfare of social policies which are ingrained in our Constitution. We are today talking about capacities, not just capabilities. And this is where we start off. And as part of this, it is very important to understand that social policy in India has therefore evolved, looking at its population and the needs of this diverse population, which has come through. We have looked at through large-scale safety net programs. We are now talking about rights-based approach to welfare. We have got food rights, we have got employment rights, we have got education rights. All of this have come from our directive principles and which have become today rights. And these large-scale programs, one of the biggest food program of the world is our welfare program around reaching subsidized food to people. to deal with hunger, not so much with nutrition, but hunger need is the first need that we are dealing with, which came up. And all of this brings us to what we say in some of our work that we have said, we say devil is in the detail. We say devil is in the detail because while talking about social policies and the evolution of social policies in India, it needs understanding the details of the implementation mechanisms of the program is essential in designing the governance structure which is needed for making these policies better reachable and reaching welfare to the people in the related spaces. So therefore, we use the work, and that's where we say devil is in the details. And we have seen safety nets coming from prenatal school, the whole lifestyle approach to safety net is starting from prenatal to preschool to school-going children and adults and senior citizens. You see all of that in our programs. We see pathways of the climate change and food systems. We see, if you look at it, we are looking at it starting from recognizing the challenges in the biodiversity domain to increase availability of, increase volatility of the prices, and moving on to access issues of access, reduced capability, and how to deal with increased need to deal with vulnerabilities in the population. These vulnerabilities are not just urban, rural vulnerabilities, but also vulnerabilities linked to our coastline, people living around the coast, coastal regions, and all types of area, which is state-wise defined. So these issues fall under the state jurisdiction. As part of the federal structure, they come under the state list. So that's why we say it is state-wise they deal with these issues. So increasing, so therefore lower, dealing with issues of decrease of food, relation to labor productivity due to poor health, and also long-term economic growth of the country, therefore is where we look at the whole pathway, particularly looking at issues of climate on food system. These are some links which I've given you here, just to give you an idea how social policy therefore cuts across all of these issues when we are talking about just looking at what the directive principles have laid out. And it is such a fundamental part of our constitution that from that just part 4 of the constitution, which is the directive, we have been able to deal with the entire policies that the government comes up with, dealing with vulnerabilities, social structures, and reaching welfare to people, and dealing with vulnerabilities across regions, caste, tribes, gender, all of this comes into that. So the impact, looking at, I wanted to bring your highlight to one aspect here is when we are looking at natural disasters, we look at disaster per se. But natural disaster, if you look at it even as a social concern, on agriculture and wider social, you are looking at pre-production damages, which are linked to, in agriculture, for example, environment, ecosystem services. So you're looking at another concern of social concerns where you create and your pre-product damages to deal with. How do you deal with ecosystem services in production and create a productive value to farmers in that situation? And how do these become then, they minimize post-production losses when talking about losses due to, for example, due to any wider crisis that could have happened in terms of market disruption, in terms of disruption of costs, in terms of functionality, all of this, and dealing with the whole impact on livelihoods. So it is all linked here. What we are saying is we are linking up the whole pre-production, post-production, and impact. And this is where I needed to bring out one point is, here we are not just talking about agriculture farmers who are always having land. We're talking about farmers who are small farmers, because almost India has has the highest marginality of land. Less than 1 hectare of land is highest in India. So we are talking about all of this when you're talking about impact and dealing with impact of disaster on agriculture and the wider consequences. So another aspect which we talk about, the risk resilience of vulnerability. And I wanted to give you this picture because it is here when we say social policies, we always say that yes, welfare is done, so resilience has gone up, so vulnerability should come down, resource net vulnerability should also reduce. Vulnerability should also reduce, because when you put something into a society, you give welfare into a society, it's assumed that vulnerability will also. This is one of the reasons which I keep telling is, we're talking about social policies, we say, increasing inequality in India. Sure, It is unequal, but this data is not recognizing that with increasing resilience reaching to people, the population is also growing, and those who are poor are also improving the economic status, but compared to the others who have already improved their status, their inequality continues. So this aspect of that data is not recognized in global data, which we see when we talk about rankings for inequality and others. We have to recognize that, yes, there is an increase, but comparative relative increase, when one is increasing, rich is because the people who are vulnerable are also improving, but compared to the others, there still remains a distinction difference. So that's why if you see between 2018 and 2020, you saw with a lot of government support and a lot of disaster from climate disaster, for example, people have been able to improve resilience. The 1999 disasters, which saw, for example, in more than 10,000 people killed in the state of Odisha, and the recent disaster, same impact, we saw less than 2%, or less than 10 people who died. So that people have developed resilience. There has been infrastructure development which has created resilience. But compared to vulnerability still continues to be there, because dealing with resilience doesn't mean that you're dealing with vulnerability. And that is why, so despite average increase in resilience, there has been little change in vulnerability. And this is something that we need to recognize when we are talking about resilience and vulnerability, particularly with reference to social policies. And today's world, the bar for resilience is constantly being raised by human action. We are always raising up. If you're going to become more, if development, economic growth are not risk informed, they have to be risk informed. Today, farmers are being informed about risks. Agriculture input is going with risk involved. Climate information, they cannot be sustainable. So therefore, social policy and risk information is very much linked. Economic losses often create new risks or create conditions which exacerbate risks that have significant human costs. So therefore, while talking about human action for resilience, we must also recognize that there is to be a strong will and commitment to deal with reducing vulnerabilities. And that's where we are talking about how to create more sustainable futures for us, looking at our social policies and state finances as a major concern. There are states which are you have under the decentralized structures, funds are being given to states. And at the same time, as per the estimates, expenditures are being, but today political processes are such that freebies exceed almost 2% of the funds that is being provided. And these are seen in highly indebted states. Andhra Pradesh, for example, Punjab, for example, are highly indebted, and they still continue to give freebies. So how do you deal with social policies and reach welfare when freebies are being given, which is considered? So as opposed to freebies and public policies, we need to that Punjab, Rajasthan, Kerala, West Bengal, Bihar, Andhra Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, all of these, Haryana, turn out to be the states with the highest debt burden in the country. Highest debt burden. So these account for half the total expenditure of all states in the country. And we must towards create an awareness in the public today is that freebies do not come to you free. We are paying for it. That's the point that needs to come to everybody of us. So if you're dealing with poverty elevation, we must also realize that poverty is not something that you deal with by taking benefit from what the government is giving you. We must create capacities within us and create a higher employability quotient. India's vocational and skill development program is a very important program that has now emerged as part of the employability question, which represents a multi-level approach to understand knowledge systems, spatial realities, and capitals concerned with poverty, livelihoods. But here I would like to add a note to this. The skill programs are still seen as second brother or step brother of the programs which are having more recognition, the BA, BSc, and BCom. So today we need to create through skill education and vocational, we also need to create opportunities for giving a recognition, aspirational value to skill education also. Because through skill education, we are not just creating people who are dependent on policy, but also creating capacities in people to access the welfare and social policies that are being made available to us and become more and more self-reliant. And this is something that I hope I'm not taking too much time. Is this okay? I'll just be concluding here. When I say the knowledge cost for India's pace to social welfare delivery is that, yes, we have a jugaad economy within us. In India, this jugaad economy is more in the space of skill, but one of the key reasons for India's failure to address the large knowledge gap that we're having is the last mile reach doesn't happen. And that's where we need to strengthen our last mile reach. And that's where I will leave it to Professor Nivedita, because that's where we talk about how we strengthen our implementation. We need to strengthen our implementation. We need to look at how we will connect to the last miles. Thank you. I hope I kept to my time. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am, you kept your time and it was very interesting. Thank you so much.
So
Thank you so much, ma'am.
I will stop sharing the screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. I was not sure what's the time I have to speak, and I didn't want to take away Professor Nivedita's time because we want to listen to her also.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for such a comprehensive presentation. I think which was really very informative for our participant and also relevant in today's context. Definitely your presentation, I think, would have ignited the minds of all our participants on social policy. Now moving on to our next speaker, I'm pleased to introduce another eminent speaker, Dr. Nivedita Haran, who was former Additional Chief Secretary, Kerala, and she has graduated with Economics and Philosophy Honours. She also obtained Masters in Philosophy from Jadpur University and PhD in Sociology from IIT Delhi. She joined the Indian Administrative Service in 1980 and worked in the state of Kerala and in the Government of India in various departments such as land revenue, disaster management, agriculture, industries, labor and employment, planning and home. And also she served as district collector in various districts. She was also director and later appointed as joint secretary in the Ministry of Urban Development, Government of India. She was on deputation to the UN Peacekeeping Mission in Kosovo for 5 years. And the post-retirement, she has been engaged in various activities related to research and academics in the areas of disaster resilience building, good governance, digitization of land records, labor and migration issues, and management of water, wastewater, and solid waste. She is also a member of the court-appointed Committee of Experts for Cleaning Up and Conservation of the Dal Lake and the committee related to the modernization of land records in Delhi. She is also chairperson of the Center for Migration and Inclusive Development and Ente Bhumi Trust. She has been a regular speaker at various training institutes, including the Civil Service Training Academy at Mussoorie. Really happy to be here, ma'am, waiting eagerly to listen to your talk. Now I request ma'am to deliver her speech or talk. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Respected Pro VC, all the faculty members, and friends. It's an honor to be able to share the stage, the virtual stage with Professor Madhushri. She's a longtime friend and colleague of mine. We have worked in various committees and groups together. And it's such a pleasure listening to you, Professor.
Thank you,
you speak with such clarity.
Thank you, ma'am.
What I will, before I start, a little advice to the Pro VC. You know what you should do? You have a very bad throat. You should drink a bit of tulsi juice in the night, warm tulsi juice with warm water. You will get cured in a day. Just see overnight, you'll be okay. I say this with my little interest in gardening and Ayurveda that I'm following these days. As we all know, and as Professor Madhushri rightly said, that she has done the difficult part, which is explaining the entire theory of it. I will speak from my experience and from what I think may strike a chord, may be taken up by some of the academicians who are listening to us today. So as Professor Madhushri mentioned, the directive principles of state policy are contained in Part 4 of our Constitution. And Part 3 is the fundamental rights. Now, right from the days, our Mussoorie days, you know, it's always drilled into us that it's the fundamental rights. It's Part 3 that is the crucial part of our Constitution, whereas Part 4 is the directive principles of state policy are more related to development, to the welfare, bringing up a welfare state, setting up a welfare state, primarily because they are non-justiciable. They cannot be implemented or enforced through court orders, whereas the fundamental rights can be. Also, the directive principles are more based, rather than on individuals, they concern the society, the state. And it's more towards the welfare state, the kind of state and the kind of society, the kind of economy that our forefathers and our political leaders and social leaders have aspired for, and what we also aspire for. Now, if that be so, if the directive principles are non-justiciable, are they less important? Are they of less use? Do they have less impact on our lives, on the lives of a common citizen? I think I'm going to touch upon these issues. Now, if that be so, if it is so that the directive principles are non-justiciable, can their implementation be left to the political leaders alone? I think that is a question that let's talk about, and let's think about it a little. Now, as you know, and I think you are professors and teachers, you will know better than me that the concept of the directive principles came to us from the Irish Constitution, and they have something of that nature, and we adopted that. Now, has a time come to revisit them? I feel that if not revisit, a time has come for an open discussion on them. And I say this because I am a product of a person who has been in service at the height of my service in the 90s and the early 2000s. And when in early 1990s, when the country was, you know, as they said, went through the process of economic reforms, the idea drilled into us sometimes, by us, I mean the government officials, was that the directive principles are perhaps going to be less important than they were pre-1990s. But you know, what I found, having served in the government for almost 20 years after that, 25 years after that, what I find is that perhaps that is not correct. And that is not correct because even though the fundamental rights are legally enforceable and they are duties of the government, which it's duty bound to provide to the citizens, the directive principles impose on the government a kind of moral duty, which I think borders on the government's more primary duty at times than was envisaged, and which is good. I think that should be so, and that is the reason why I think the Part 4 of the Constitution has become much more important than it normally was expected to be, perhaps. The reason being that we still are, one, we still are a developing country. Two, we still have 25% of our people still below the poverty line. The jury is out. I'm not sure whether it's 20, some say 18, some say even less or more. But we do have people who still need basic requirements for their livelihood. And three, for a country like India, if it is to become a developed country, or let's say a superpower, whatever it be, unless we have good social welfare development, unless the people have the basics, unless we bring down our poverty level to a minimal, I do not think that is possible. And I think nobody would deny that. No country on earth could become a superpower where the country's 20-25% of its population is below the poverty line. Now, this is also important because the preamble expresses that the fundamental rights, they provide for a free democracy, whereas the directive principles of state policy are those that impinge on the day-to-day lives of the people. You see, what I'm trying to say is that the fundamental rights, in a way, are more, they border on the legalese, whereas the DPs are something that impinge on our lives on a daily basis. So whether it is education, whether it is health, agriculture, industries, gender equity, children's welfare, local self-government, labor laws, the setting up of cooperative societies, even prohibition. You see, these are requirements for any society for day-to-day life, for having a good, balanced day-to-day lives. And these are the issues and these are the sectors that are mentioned in the DPs in part 4 of our constitution. So how can we say that they are less important? They are not. The other point I want to make is that even though they are non-justiciable, there are cases, and I have been part of taking up or defending as representing before the court cases where the issue has been about protecting the directive principles. So I want to give an example. For instance, the Land Reforms Act. You know, many of you will know when the Land Reforms Act came as part of the agrarian reforms, and Kerala was one of the forerunners. It was challenged, one of the reasons being that it is not a fundamental right. But it was upheld by the court, by the Supreme Court. It also, many of the amendments which were again challenged were again upheld by the apex court. So therefore, to say that the directive principles are in any way less or to be handled with need not get as much attention would be, I think, a travesty of the situation. I would also like to mention here that even though non-justiciable, the directive principles, if you look at a budget, and this exercise I had done at one point of time in the context of writing a white paper, if you look at the budget, the state budget of any state, and I did it for Kerala, we did it for Kerala. If you look at the amount allocated for different departments, you will find that the departments which fall within the directive principles, which means departments like labor, cooperation, children's welfare, agriculture, these departments consisted of more than 80% of the budget, of the budgetary allocation. And I'm talking about the early 2000s when we had done this quick survey of 5 years of the budgetary allocations of Kerala and how much of it bordered or was pertaining to the directive principles. So if 80% of the budget of a state is allocated towards implementation of the DPs, of the directive principles, how can we say that they are less important? The other point I want to make is that in India, in a country like India, which has a sizable population still below the poverty line, a sizable population which still needs to have its basic needs fulfilled, where 70% of the employment comes from the agriculture sector, even today, where inequality still persists, and the inequality, the distance may have gone down, as Dr. Madhusri mentioned, the extent may have gone down, but the inequality is there. In fact, I believe that the inequality has gone up, but that's another story, and maybe I'll discuss with Professor Madhusri one of the days. So where inequality persists, and the inequality is on the economic front, the social front, and now the digital front, where the country, if the country has to progress, if the country has to be a superpower, those below the poverty level have to be brought up. And that can only happen if the DPs are taken very, very seriously. And therefore, I think even though we had 1990 and the liberalization of the economy, etc., frankly, and I have read papers on that, frankly, if you look at the budget, the state budgets, not so much the union budget, but the state budgets, which deals with the different developmental departments, the social welfare departments, the budgetary allocation to these sectors have not gone down. They cannot go down. And they cannot go down because unless the country ensures that the people who are below the poverty level are brought up to a certain minimal level of development, whether it is the basic needs, whether it is food, water, safe water, housing, land rights, even subsidized food, employment, the country cannot say that part 4 is any less than part 3. And I don't think anyone will be able to say. It could be an academic discussion, but nobody can say that. I also want to refer to the point that in a country which is as large as India, which is as diverse as India, where the income sources are also so diverse and so changing, and we have so much resources. We have resources in every way possible. I think we cannot say that the DPs will get any less attention than the fundamental rights, and only then we would be able to get accept the policies of the government. I also finally want to mention that if you look at the government of India's, if you look at the political front, and you take up the speeches of our during election speeches of our leaders, of our political leaders, you will find that the entire speech would be full of how to fulfill the directive principles. That is the most important thing that is required even at the political level. Nobody talks about the fundamental rights, obviously, because the fundamental rights pertain more to the individual or groups of individuals, whereas directive principles are something that pertain to entire, if not society, at least sections of society, which impact and impinge upon much larger groups than the fundamental rights would be, because fundamental rights are more general in nature. Whereas directive principles, when you talk, whether you are talking about the rationing system, the subsidy on agricultural inputs, it's all part of the directive principles. So in a nutshell, I'm glad that this kind of discussion has opened and it's going on, because we need to really talk about it, especially in present times, where India is at the threshold of many changes. We need to understand that we cannot ignore the DPs. No administrator, no person can ignore it. In fact, I was going to say no academicians can ignore it either, because the directive principles are something that need to be followed and implemented if the country is really to move forward. Now, I think I've spoken enough, but I'm sure if there's a discussion, I'll be able to participate in that. Once again, thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope more and more research is carried out in this area. And the Pro-VC mentioned about having courses, special courses in this area. I think that would be excellent. And that would, you could get different sectors and different thinkers in this area into the forum. And a discussion of this nature would be very, very topical. Once again, thank you. It's an honor, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sparing your valuable time and sharing your experience and wisdom with us. And now, like, if any of our participants have any other discussions or queries, so we have just 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, we can have the discussion.
Would
Hello,
you like
ma'am.
to? Yes, please.
Yeah, ma'am, just wanted to ask Dr. Nivedita, ma'am, that since he was talking about inequality is rising, though we have been, hearing a lot and reading a lot about it, just wanted to, get some perspective from the administrator. If you can share some example, ma'am, in that term. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. No, I do not believe that, well, I cannot say with certainty whether inequality is rising, but I can definitely say that as Professor Madhushri mentioned, that a large part of the population is going above the poverty line. That is true. But then the rich are becoming richer. And perhaps that's something because that has, that's part of the liberalization of our economy. There's nothing bad about it. But as a person who has been in the government, who has worked in the government for many, many years, decades, I feel that the rise and the rise in the large number of people, sorry, let me put it this way, the rise in the difference between the top 5% and the bottom 5%, that should be a concern for us. And that is not a good thing, because I have seen in my experience in the field that can be the cause, and that is normally the cause of many other social problems, including criminality, drug abuse, etc., etc. And therefore, the feeling amongst our civil servants sometimes that it's not important now to lay attention on the bottom 5%. I think that can be rather misplaced at times, because I think as the country is growing and with the more liberal economic policies, the importance and the need for the civil servants and the public servants to attend more towards the bottom 5% becomes doubly important, if not trebly important, because they are the people who are voiceless, who are, who have no one to listen to them except the collector or the tahsildar or the patwari. And therefore, but unfortunately, that kind of thing, when I go to Mussoorie, I often speak on this, but I think that view should be also written on, and academicians should also cogitate on this aspect.
And I'd just like to add on to what Dr. Nivedita has said to this, is that it's a very important point, and what another issue when we're talking about inequality, yes, poor who is also improving, the richer are becoming richer, and still the inequality is existing. But today what we need to recognize is the face of inequality is also changing. The face of inequality is also changing. Inequality is linked to access to digital welfare, digital information. Inequality is linked to access to food, clean water, sanitation conditions. Inequality is linked to housing, land entitlements, all of these are not just inequalities and inequalities of gender and caste and class, So the face of inequality is also changing. And that's where we need to recognize is what Dr. Nivedita said is how we deal with our systems and create systems which can deal with different forms of these inequalities. And that's an important part. That's what I wanted to add on to what Doctor just said.
I would like to ask a small thing with your Nivedita madam, because of your lot of experience in the administrative field. The thing is that actually when we look at the text of the Indian Constitution, especially Part 4 of the Indian Constitution, where we find this social policy, actually broadly you are mentioning itself that 1991, that globalization and liberalization policies, then we started acting actually the contra constitutionally to this text. Actually, when you look at the text, the things actually, the post-independent governments, actually a lot of progressive social legislations has come up, like land legislation, and we wanted to, it envisages the great role to the state actually, because of that state was playing a very, very crucial role. And we started to bring the means of production from public sector, private sector to public sector. We have started the nationalization policy and monopoly restriction act, and many things, land reforms, reservations to the downtrodden sections, and other things, and all, so on and so on. But we started actually now that role, the state of role is abandoned actually, and everything we are contra constitutionally started acting, and we are abandoning the public sector, and we are selling away the public sector, and public sector is day by day going down, and there is no scope for any kind of like health and education. Especially nobody talks about the immediately it says that Article 36 says that these are fundamental in the governance of the country. Nevertheless, these are not enforceable by any court of law, but nevertheless fundamental in the governance of the country. But immediately Article 38, 39, nobody talks about it actually. At the same time, 43A, 47 other things, where we stand actually in the global hunger index. These are all actually, we are going contra constitutionally towards and subverting the constitutional principles actually. I strongly feel that as a student of political science. But we talk about always some of the principles, like once in a while that some non-important principles, like for the political reasons, like UCC, common civil code. No doubt about it. Common civil code is very much required. Could you light on this?
Yeah, let me respond before Professor Madhushri comes in. Having been part of the government through the liberalization and much beyond that, frankly speaking, and that is why I quickly gave the example of the state budgets, even post-liberalization, and I'm talking about 2000 onwards, when we did this analysis in a state like Kerala, where, of course, we have both, we have the UDF and we have the LDF, we found that almost 80% of the budgets go towards departments which are covered under the DPs, under the directive principles. So I think, I don't think we should have any doubt about that. The second point is when you mentioned that it's not after 1990, it's the attitude of the government has changed. Look at the manifesto of any political party going to elections. You will find, if not 90%, 100% of the promises made pertain to the area of DPs. They are not on fundamental principles at all. They are DPs. On a lighter note, I can say the fundamental rights are probably more existing more as cases in the courts rather than in the government. The fundamental rights being justiciable, there may be immense number of cases and keeping the courts busy, but the actual work of development happens in the government through the DPs, through the sectors and the departments mentioned in the directive principles. And I do not think they have become any less post 1990. Dr. Madhushri, you want to add on that? Because you must have also...
I wanted to add, if I would just like to add to what you have just said, ma'am. I just want to say that, yes, directive principles still continue to be, and one of the biggest insight to this is seeing how the government political party has been talking about the issues concerned around policies, which are very much a major part of our constitution and linked to our directive principles, which have also become our rights-based approach, where we have moved in the 90s at 2000 onwards, we have moved towards rights for people to move. But I also wanted to add one more dimension to this discussion around the spending on welfare is coming down. That's true. There are welfare because the priorities are shifting, the nature of development and requirement is changing. But we never see how much percentage of the government funds are diverted towards freebies versus public goods. We are not making that distinction. When we say freebies, when you say you are going to give free electricity, where does the free electricity come from? It comes from the payment that those who are paying taxes are paying for that, because government has to pay for it somewhere. How do you give water when you're creating subsidies for groundwater extraction? You are creating a condition where that extraction can only be done with those who are having land. We are working around these, but we are now working in a tribal district in Maharashtra, where we have gone, land becomes the criteria for giving their subsidies to get a well dug. A farmer who does not have land, how will he get a well dug? So the point here is that, yes, welfare expenditure is coming down, but the point that needs to be recognized is how do we reach the last mile? And that's where we are talking about strengthening the last mile linkages by creating information with the community, information in the system, public administration, the frontline service providers, creating an incentive in them. Because if you look at the Anganwadi worker, she's one of the most lowly paid Anganwadi worker, and you are giving her a huge task of providing food. How does she reach? How do you provide? They don't even have subsidies given to them to reach, go by a bike or somewhere to reach the different villages, the Asha worker, which are under the jurisdiction. So we have to look at it in a lot. We look at how much freebies are coming. How do we become more conscious about the state funding that is available and the state spending that is happening? Strengthen the administration that we're looking at, particularly the last line strengthening in terms of reaching, creating information in the communities and people so that we deal with the last aspects with regarding information to them, able to access info, able to avail not only availability but also access. That's what I wanted to add up to this important point. Yes, this is where we need to talk about social policy, because policies will be at the structural level. It's at the implementation level is what we are talking.
Any other questions?
Very happy to see Sir here, Vice Chancellor here of IGNOU, and I would like to take this opportunity just to thank him for allowing us to speak on this important platform. Sir, thank you for your opportunity to give us to speak here.
If there are no questions, we can wind up the session. Now, I'd like to invite Dr. Saintony Gwynn, Associate Professor from School of Social Work, to give vote of thanks.
Respected Pro-Vice Chancellor, Professor Uma Kanjilal, Madam, Professor Rose Nambiakim, Director, School of Social Work, distinguished speakers, Professor Madhushri Shekhar and Dr. Nivedita Haran, dear colleagues, and everyone gathered here in this webinar. It is my privilege to propose vote of thanks in today's Constitutional Day lecture on the topic Social Policy at Crossroads, a Constitutional Perspective. On behalf of the School of Social Work, first of all, I would like to propose our profound gratitude to our Honorable Vice Chancellor for supporting us in all our endeavors. We are fortunate to have Professor Uma Kanjilal, Madam, as our Pro-Vice Chancellor for guiding and motivating us always and encouraging us to do better. Thank you, Madam, for sparing your valuable time to be with us today and delivering the special address. Webinar like this cannot happen overnight. It requires planning and bird's eye for detail. Here, we are fortunate enough to be guided by our director, Professor Rose Nembiakim, for her motivation and support. Thank you, Professor Rose. I wish to convey our heartiest thanks to our speaker, Professor Madhushri Shekhar from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, for providing a broad overview of social policy, including its linkage with food security, disaster management, vulnerability, and risk resilience. Thank you so much, Madam, for your sharing your views. Our sincere thanks to Dr. Nivedita Haran for sharing her views on the importance of the directive principles of state policy in fulfilling the basic mandates of social policy in India. Thank you so much, Madam, for sharing your thoughts. My heartfelt thanks to all our colleagues, especially Dr. Binod, for organizing this wonderful webinar, and Dr. Ramya for being a wonderful moderator. I thank all support staff, especially the Electronic and Media Production Division for live streaming this event. Last but not the least, I thank all the participants for making this webinar a great success. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And thank you,
Thank
Madam.
you, Dr. Shantanu.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you all of you.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you so much. Thank you.